Hello and welcome to Dr. Thornburg podcast. This is my very first podcast, and I am joined by Dr. Udo Fischer. He's a German-trained psychologist, longtime friend. I refer to him often. His depth of knowledge and practical advice is wonderfully accepted by all my families. I go to him constantly. We go out to dinner once a month, and we have long talks about life and how to handle different situations. So I thought it'd be great, and I love having him as my first guest. Here's Dr. Udo Fischer. Tell me how you got here and how you're here from Germany.
Yeah, be happy to. So I have to thank my father for that. He invested in real estate in Naples in the early 90s, which made me come over here every other 2 years to look at his properties and spend a nice vacation on the beach, predominantly as a German. About 20 years ago, I became a little bit more curious about what it would mean to live here and to potentially settle here. A little bit later, met my wife in Naples.
Were you already practicing when you met your wife?
Not here. I was still vacationing.
Okay.
I was still vacationing. I was not practicing here. I was still residing in Germany at the time, but then try to find out a way to get established here and try to figure that out. Finally did that. And
It was love and land.
It was love and land and the beauty of Naples.
That's
indeed.
excellent. That's excellent.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Good. So tell me about the German training, which is a little different than what we do here in the United States. And so just because most people think that education is the same around the world,
Yes.
but actually it's quite different in Germany.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
I think it has changed a little bit in the last 20 years since I left and been a little bit more equalized internationally with the British and the American system. However, when I went to school and got out of school, it was the case that after elementary school, children were being assigned to either one of three secondary school paths, depending on their GPA, basically, after the first 4 years in elementary school. If you had a pretty good GPA, meaning predominantly A's or B's maximally, then you could go to an accelerated school path that would, in the later years, prepare you for university in the grades 11 to 13. And only that particular degree that you could obtain in that school path after 13 years of primary education, if you will, would allow you to go to university afterwards. The university system at the time was very different in that regard from here, that when you decided to study medicine, law, psychology, or engineering, whatever it might be, you would have to have the appropriate GPA to get into that program. It was solely merit-based, completely based on GPA and supply and demand of those places to study, or those seats to study in those programs. And at the time still, I think that's still predominantly the case today, few German universities were rather large and they were all research universities. So there were no private colleges or universities where you could, if your parents were wealthy enough, pay for play, so to speak. That was not existent. So it was all completely merit-based and all universities were research universities.
So that's interesting because here, clearly, it's not merit-based. They're somewhat merit-based, and we don't know
Some
how
are.
that... Some are.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to define that line because the admissions committees are not very forthright or forthcoming with what they're deciding is important as admission criteria from year to year.
Yes.
But there's been plenty of examples of people who've bought their way into prestigious colleges here. But it sounds like at least 20 years ago, that wasn't possible. In Germany, everything was really merit-based.
Right.
Even the super wealthy families in Germany or politically connected families still couldn't take their child and advance them beyond what they were testing
Correct. There was
to an ability.
Practically no way around that.
Right.
You know, 30 years ago, approximately, I signed up, if you will, and applied. And there was just one central authority that looks through all the applications for the different programs and then decides based on how many seats are available in that year or the coming year and the GPAs of the people who apply, who gets allowed and who doesn't. Traditionally, it was always medicine, psychology, and law that were the hardest to get into.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty true in most places.
Yeah.
You said something interesting, and I believe there's a historical connection here. You said that the German universities are primarily research-based.
Yes.
And our universities, the big universities, the state universities, are research-based as well here. Mm-hmm. But I'm connecting the historical thread that the scientific method, which is what embodies modern medicine today, actually came out of Germany back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Yeah. And so our medical system through the Flexner Report was modeled on the scientific method, which was not being used in any university really until the late 1800s, early 1900s, anywhere around the world, was still a kind of a theocracy in the higher educational institutions. And just as an aside, at Harvard in 1865, the president of Harvard, Charles Eliot, asked the dean of the Harvard Medical School to implement a written exit exam for the graduating medical students. And the dean of the medical school said, "That's impossible. Most of our students here at Harvard Medical School do not read or write. We cannot implement a written exam." So medical education was very different, and Germany led the way in terms of the scientific method. So how does that translate with your degree? Because here, again, in the States, we have two types of psychologist. One is a PhD based, and the other is a PsyD based.
Correct.
And so,
Correct.
So explain that a little bit.
So the PsyD degree is the practitioner informed by research. The PhD is the researcher who can practice as well, however, who's more research-based in their studies. So in Germany at the time, it was a heavily research-based degree. You study psychology from the first day on. All the generic prerequisites, if you will, you already got out of the way during grades 11 to 13 in the what you might call the college prep or the university prep school path. So from day on, you will be, and we were, a part of and a member of research and lecturing and teaching. So all seminars basically from the first semester on were basically led by the students. The professors were just there to analyze and critique and give feedback, but the students were actually holding the presentations, informing about theories and studies, in addition to being part of research as objects of research. So we had to have a certain amount of hours we had to provide for and prove for and account for after 2 years, where we had to participate in other people's experiments and studies, for that matter.
So it's right from the ground up. It was
from the ground up, from the first semester on.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so just kind of round out this so we can get into some parenting discussion is, so you came over from Germany and you're German-trained psychologist, what would be an equivalent, because they're not apples to apples between the educational system, what is equivalent to a PhD here in the United States. And with love and land and the beautiful Naples, you set up shop, and here we are today. I think we met, 2013, something.
12 or 13 years ago.
12 or 13, yeah.
Yep.
And well, that's great. So I wanted to bring you on because one of the questions I receive a lot from parents is about how do we handle different temperaments in children. And I had a mom in this weekend, so I'm going to use her as an example because it's a very real world situation, and would like to get into the transition from toddler to childhood. So this mom has a 4-year-old who is very spirited, if we want to call it that, and they were here for a well child check because mom had recently had a second child. And so the 4-year-old, somewhat displaced from his multi-year reign in the house where he had access to both parents and had constant attention. And mom is the type who enjoys making people feel happy and included. And so she was happy with one child to have a very friendly, cooperative, at least from her perspective, relationship. And now this new baby has landed in, and mom obviously has to spend a lot of time with the baby and nursing and up at night. And this has removed the first child from having unbridled access to mom. And the child is now very boisterous, loud, temper tantrum throwing. And we had a talk. The mom and I had a talk. Before I say what I told her, I would love to see how you would handle it. Mom was frustrated with the situation, and again, she's a happy mom, a devoted mother, happy to make other people happy. And we have this toddler that now has a new baby in the house and is having a difficult time with that transition. So, what would the just kind of off the cuff advice be to that mom?
Very good question. So I know we'll get into that in a slightly different segment in the near future. But basically, one could look at, okay, how can mom teach, lead, and guide the older child away from maybe the negative attention seeking that you're, I think, alluding to,
Yes.
because that child was used to having all the resources and attention just to himself. It's a male child, right?
Yes.
So I would think about, generally always when behavior should be shaped in children into more desirable behavior that the parents have identified, is to incentivize and reward that desirable behavior. So not to scold or punish the child for undesirable behavior, which I think all prone and good at doing during the daily grind when we're stressed out and we're distracted and it's very stressful. So we all have a propensity to do that. But to really, really think about, okay, I obviously want the child to be more cooperative. I want the child to, maybe even be supportive or joyful around helping, for example, with the younger child, and not seeing the younger child in competition, but maybe as an enrichment to him and the family's life, not as an entity or a being that takes positive things away from him. So the fundamental thought that I always suggest is, okay, let's think about how we can translate what we want from the older child in this example into positive expectations and behavioral benchmarks and agreements that are conveyed child appropriately. As you mentioned before, if the child is pre-verbal or not yet very verbally sophisticated and developed and can't read yet, we might work with images as well, imagery. Although when we communicate with them, if it's an eloquent and reasonably verbal child, we can probably explain it verbally too. So the idea would be to express, articulate positive expectations to the 4-year-old child that can preemptively be agreed on with that child, and then really, really reward that desirable behavior when the child is able to restrain himself and or share attention or resources with the needs of the younger child, and then get rewarded in ways that is meaningful to this particular individual child.
Let's land that all the way down. So
Yes.
So mom is nursing the baby,
Mm-hmm.
and the 4-year-old comes over demanding attention. And this could be in the form of a temper tantrum, or maybe he hits the mom, or he runs out of the room where the mom then has to follow him because she can't have an upset toddler running the house.
Yes.
So how would positive redirecting strategies help in this kind of real situation?
Yes. Well, let me add to it that I personally find it very, very difficult to be creative on the fly, to be spontaneously creative when a situation is already stressful. So I find it very important to think about these things in advance. So when they do occur, that we already know what to do. It's very difficult to improvise on the fly when the bullets start flying left and right, metaphorically, and come up with a great solution. But again, the fundamental idea would be, hey, 4-year-old son, I would like you to focus on X, Y, and Z right now, or do A, B, and C right now. If you can do that, we're going to do whatever it may be in 5 or 10 minutes down the road.
So go play with your blocks or your little people right now.
For example.
And mommy's busy with the baby. Mommy would love to spend time with you.
Yes.
And once the baby's fed, because everybody needs to eat food, and the baby's been crying for food.
Yes.
So once I do that, then I will play with you.
Yes.
And then that way, baby gets food,
Yep.
because you know how you feel when you get hungry. So you do something that just connects to the child. But it's prefabricated. So this is prefabricated parenting.
I suggest, because these situations are usually recurring in nature, that doesn't just happen once, of course.
Right.
In a constellation like this, that once I'm out of the stressful situation, and in general, that I sit down as a parent, probably with a co-parent as well, if there's a strong and present co-parent in the mix, of course, that is involved in these things at times, and come up with a preemptive plan, an agreement that I can lay out to the child and reiterate or redirect the child to whenever I need to. Because again, it's very, very hard to come up with great answers when it's very, very stressful.
Yes. So rather than waiting for the moment
to happen again,
now we sit down with the other parent.
Yes.
We sit down with the child, the 4-year-old in this case.
After I found a good solution with the other parent.
Okay, so the parents have a discussion
first. When I'm ready to present
first.
that united front, that positive approach, then we lay it out.
Okay, yes. So
the child.
So the parents get together, discuss how to handle this, because there might be, maybe both parents are home, and then there could be a release valve that the other parent comes in when it's time to nurse. So we don't have that conflict. That could be one resolution. The other, if the other parent's not at home during working hours, say, then the mother, in this case, would have to come up with a strategy to handle and preempt. That's why I call it preemptive parenting. Preempt the child. So maybe before nursing, knowing that nursing is going to happen in 10 minutes because the baby's waking up from a nap, we set the other toddler up with some markers and some paper, something that's more unique in the inventory of toys, and then that occupies the child long enough to get through.
And the explicit or implicit message to the older child in this case would be, hey, if you can do this for 5 or 10 minutes while I'm doing this because baby needs to eat and what have you, as you mentioned, then mommy and you get to do X, Y, and Z, which really excites the 4-year-old.
Yeah, I think that we could keep going on those specific, but I think the idea is we want to get in front of the issue, understanding that a toddler is going to do toddler things, and we can't expect them to act like an adult, and to interpret the situation with the same value set of baby needs to eat, that's the first priority, and everything comes after that. The toddler only knows that I need to be given attention right now. And so we want to get in front of that. So what I told the mom is when we have a second child in the house, things change, obviously, because the oldest child at this age doesn't understand what I call the change of a movie set. They don't have enough experience to understand that life will throw you curveballs, and then the movie that you were in is now a different movie with a different cast of characters or different circumstances. And so the child is distressed because of that. And so they need some empathy. And that doesn't mean that we give the child what they want. We help them. It's kind of like learning to ride a bike. Okay, here's a new situation. You're going to feel good on the other side of the distressful process of learning to balance and fall down as you learn to balance on your bike. And the same thing here. We're going to give you a guiding hand with a loving approach to handle this new stress. And so what that means for you, Mom, because she knows that she's a pleasing type, is that you have to think of yourself as a CEO of a company. And a CEO, no CEO likes to do everything that every department does. They have a certain affinity for, say, finance or marketing, and then they're not very interested in HR. Doesn't mean that their lack of interest allows them to ignore the HR department, because that would be a disaster for the company. The CEO, the mom, has to manage the different aspects of the house like a CEO, and that means that let's call it policy. The preemptive parenting is a policy formation for the company, so the mom can have a less stressful day and the house can operate in a more fluid, harmonious way. Just like we don't want to have unexpected surprises with HR or marketing or finance in a company. We want to make sure that we're looking into the future, and that's the same thing here. So this mom that enjoys peace has to get outside of herself a little bit to understand that the dynamics have changed. I need to pay a priority attention because now we have limited resources. Unlike when we had one child, now we have limited resources. I can't give both children everything they want whenever they want. So we're going to create a company policy that helps the family, in this case, move forward in the best way while helping in that loving way the child experience the struggle of learning to be part of a family.
And to your prior point, the executive analogy or metaphor as well, a child does not yet have a fully developed frontal lobe, as we know. That can last until a person's early 20s. And you can even doubt if all adults have it at all times. But a child definitely doesn't have it from a neurophysiological and developmental and anatomical perspective. So to expect a child of that age potentially to just be able to reason and restrain their impulses and emotions is just not realistic, just based on that.
No, it's not. And what the 4-year-old from a developmental psychological standpoint is just burgeoning onto some primitive concrete logic. So they're just now starting to say, wait a minute, grandmother isn't just an older lady. Grandmother's your mom, just like you're my mom. And now they understand this logical connection, but they can't stay in that state all the time. They cycle between I can be rational to I am completely emotional and non-rational in 2 seconds. And you can see that. I want a cookie. And then you distract them with something else. And all of a sudden they're super happy again in literally 1 second. It's a remarkable ability that a toddler has.
Which is why we need short-term incentives rather than long-term incentives or goals at this age.
Right. So the incentive, the positive reinforcement is something that happens immediate. Unlike, well, if you do these 5 things through the day, then
On the weekend, we get to do X,
we get
Y,
to go
Z.
to
That's not appropriate for a
lost
4-year-old.
lost translation.
Right, exactly.
Lost translation.
Exactly.
All right,
Yes.
great.